Every year I read the Booker Prize long list, which is a book prize basically representing the best fiction novels of the last 12 months. This year, however, my opinions of the books longlisted was somewhat less than complimentary. As a reader, I was really expecting something interesting or character defining to happen at some point in this novel. This book is trash. Held by Anne Michaels is mind-numbingly boring. There is nothing strange, much less eventful, that happens in this novel. No interesting characters, no breathtaking prose, no captive scenery, no themes worth discussing, no events, just at all. The Da Vinci Code had better plot, prose, and characters than this one. It was actually quite a boring novel, I thought. Not because nothing happens, but because it's without substance. This novel should be called This Slow and Painfully Boring History. It's one of the most lacking and the worst books to ever be longlisted for the Booker Prize. Empty calories, meaningless fluff. If you like this book, I don't have any recommendations for you, except maybe you could try Sensory Deprivation. Normally in my reviews, I would tell you what the book is about here, but that information is completely irrelevant. I don't know how they managed to create a long list so narrow in scope, yet so much without identity. You can't polish a turd. I finished Held. I finished This Strange Eventful History, but I couldn't force myself to finish Enlightenment. Michael's characters are really poorly constructed. Some are just names on a page, nothing more, no depth. Gentle and beautiful novel that is also completely boring. It's nice to see that there is somebody even worse at punctuation than me out there who is also a successful author. This is a pretty poor long list. If you like this book, well, it really doesn't matter what book I recommend. Apparently, you're just entertained by the act of reading. Just read the first thing you see. Book or no, it's bound to be just as good. So I got to wondering, is this just a particularly bad year for literary fiction? Or do these judges have a particularly bad taste in literature? So I broke out my inner scientist and designed a little experiment. So I plugged 160 odd books into perplexity.ai and asked it to randomly pick a Booker Prize long list. It gave me the 2023 Booker Prize long list, which I guess is a very intelligent way to get things wrong. I asked it to do it again, and this time it came up with this alternative long list. Manny and the Baby, Colour Television, Small Rain, How I Won the Nobel Prize, The Road from Belhaven, Women and Children First, Fast by the Horn, Anyone's Ghost, These Letters End in Tears, The Anthropologists, The Great Undoing, The Woman Behind the Door. So my initial reaction to that was nobody would have predicted this long list. There was almost a 0% chance that this was ever going to be the long list. And one of my criticisms of this year's Booker long list was that it was a little obvious that it failed to introduce me to new authors. So this experiment is a really good remedy to at least that one criticism. And I was just really excited to read this collection of books because in the back of my head I had that some random judges were saying that these were the best 12 books of the last 12 months. The only author on this list I'd read before was Moses Mackenzie. I loved his debut novel. There's also an author from the Cameroon, one from Turkey. We have an Aussie author, an Irish author, a Scottish author, a few queer authors, 5 black authors from 4 different countries, an Indigenous author, and a 7-5 gender split. So a lot of different points of view, which is something I just love when I read. I love to read from different points of view when I change books. Roddy Doyle and Garth Greenwell give this list some literary credit, while we have 6 debut novels on it as well. And maybe this says a little bit more about my methodology and the large number of books that they published, but a lot of the books are from 3 of the big publishers, Pan Macmillan, Random House, and Hachette. And yes, we're missing Percival Everett, Alexis Wright, Hisham Matar, and Shigozi Obioma. So if this was the actual long list, there would be a few people complaining about it. But To be fair, I don't think we'll ever have a long list for any book prize not being criticised for the books that didn't make it. Anyway, let's get to reviewing some of these books. Manny and the Baby by Varezzo. 2012 Bath, during the London Olympics, and Atai, a young black man, is cleaning out the house of his recently deceased father when he finds a cassette tape of an interview with a woman called Rita, recording part of her life story on it. Rita in this novel is better known as the Baby, together with her older sister Manny and the trumpet player Ezekiel Brown. They want to dance, they want to play music, they want to fall in love. They are quite simple young people with a healthy balance of desire for all the things in life that they enjoy and for their future. The two timelines in this novel compare the two different societies and examine what is changed and unchanged. Rita's timeline is set in 1936, the Berlin Olympics, and the mistreatment of Jesse Owens is central to their news. In 2012, Atai is following the Olympics, and his 5 teams that he is following: Great Britain, Nigeria, Jamaica, Zimbabwe and Ireland, 1 team for his current nationality, and 4 teams, 1 for each grandparent. Atai's friend Josh is also a dealer, and he is dealing as a way of supporting himself as he trains to enter the next Olympics as a sprinter. In these examples here, we have some of the key themes of the novels: the complex nature of the modern black identity, the struggles they face to achieve, and when somebody does achieve, they may just put the establishment's nose out of place. In this example, the establishment is literally Hitler, but is it really that hard to imagine a future where Josh is a champion sprinter and his drug-dealing past is brought up to defame him? The Olympics are very much a background event in both timelines. This is a story much more about a man discovering who his grandfather was through a tale about jazz and music and love. For every book I review, I'm going to ask the question, given different judges, could this book have made an alternative Booker long list? Is this a Booker book? And I don't think that this is a Booker book. This book falls somewhere between commercial and literary, and that's not a criticism, but that's not the sort of book that we usually see on a Booker Prize long list. This is also a debut novel, and it does read a little like a debut novel. There are some strong pieces in this novel. It pulls you all the way through. It's a book that you do want to rip through. The title characters of this novel are alive and very well constructed. Ezekiel is very well constructed too, but the modern day characters not so much. This is a character focused novel, and I think that the two timeline thing, while it had a point, the payoff wasn't there, and make the focus more even or shorter and lose the framing story. Losing the framing story would risk losing all the sophistication that this novel had. The prose is simple, but it's fine. Nothing to complain about, but nothing to get excited about either. I do think the setting is very well done, but it's clearly not the focus of this novel. But this just isn't a memorable read. And you know when you find an author that you love, and then you find out that they've written a lot of books before and they have a big backlist, so you go back and you read that backlist and you still enjoy it, but it's not as good as the work that they're currently doing. I can see in 4 or 5 books' time, people are going to discover Varezzo, and they're going to have that experience. This is a good book, it's an enjoyable novel, but it's forgettable, it's a bit middle of the park. It is a slightly harsh 2 stars. But I can see this novel working for fans of Homegoing or Black Cake. Colour Television by Danzy Sena. This is a novel about the television industry, art for money versus art for art, and most of all, about race. Specifically, it's about a group of people with mixed black and white heritage. This book is constantly using a historical word that begins with the letter M and ends with the letter O. Now, I'm going to avoid using that word and say the M word instead, but I want to say that this book really took ownership of that word and really trying to reclaim that word. As our protagonist Jane puts it, biracial could be any old thing, Korean and Panamanian, or Chinese and Egyptian, but an M word is always specifically an M word. Jane is an author, and after her first novel was a success, her publisher gave her the advice, just get your second novel out as soon as you can. It doesn't even matter if it's good. Jane, however, has spent years writing her M-word War and Peace. It's massive, it's extensive, and covering the entire history of the M-word in the US, from Thomas Jefferson's messed up race politics to Carol Channing passing in Hollywood. The only problem with this book is, while a brilliant idea, it's not very well executed. It's sprawling, it lacks focus, and it needs to be completely rewritten. The book she thought was going to make money rain from the sky is not even about to be published. Jane lives with her broke artist husband and her children in her friend Brett's luxury house, an ex-author who has moved into the film industry and is away in Australia filming and producing a zombie movie for the next 12 months. What she thought was going to be a year of the good life before she was a success herself turns into a deadline that she has to fight against becoming homeless. Desperate to make money, and with her dreams of making money from her art dashed, she grows cynical and decides to do what Brett did to make money: sell out and start hunting for a Hollywood deal. There is more than a little bit of the old George Gissing classic New Grub Street about television, and it really does sum up the dog-eat-dog themes that both novels share. Hampton Ford is Jane's saviour, a Hollywood producer who says the big companies are not going to be interested in black or white stuff in 6 months' time. They're going to want smaller minorities, and the M-word is the perfect subject. The man is utterly ridiculous, a parody of a loose cannon successful type, starting work at 2 a.m. after 15 minutes sleep and doing a whole lot of white Colombian powder. Ford's character almost serves as a reminder that this novel is funny and satirical as well, balancing the serious discussions of race and art with the whimsical and sarcastic. I was trying to think who this reminds me of, and I was drawing a blank. And then, as I researched, I saw something interesting. I saw who Danzy Senna is married to, a fellow author who happens to have a novel shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize. Now, I didn't know they were married while I was reading this book, but I love that this little experiment has pitted husband against wife. This book really is for fans of Percival Everett. I am left questioning, have the two authors influenced each other's work? Or were they both always like this, and hence that's why they got married? Either way, the result is the same for us readers: a very weird and unique dark comedy. Two questions that this novel asks is, can race politics get you ahead? And will race politics get you ahead? And that it's asking both questions really does answer the first question. Yes, it can. But just because it works for one person doesn't mean that it will work for everybody. And therefore that leads to a third interesting question. What are the conditions that race politics can be used to get you ahead in? To this end, there is a lot of conversation about money, power, and ego. This was a really enjoyable read. It wasn't perfect, but I kind of don't think it was trying to be perfect. It's a cool idea. It's an author getting their idea down on paper and doing a darn good job of pulling us through a story. And as such, I'm going to give it a solid 4 stars, and I really do recommend it. I also suspect fans of Percival Everett will enjoy this book even more than me. So if that's you, why don't you give his incredibly funny wife a try too? Given different judges, could this have made the book a long list? I mean, yes, if Percival Everett can make the long list, so too can Danzy Senna. The problem that Danzy Senna has is that Percival Everett is also getting nominated for the long list. Maybe in a year that he has not ridden James, this one gets longlisted. Small Rain by Garth Greenwell. Shamefully, this is my very first Garth Greenwell book, but it's not going to be my last. He's a very talented author. This is an emotional and touching account of a man, a poet, who starts feeling a sudden and overwhelming amount of pain. After 3 days, and with his husband convincing, he takes himself to the emergency ward and ends up in ICU with a very rare illness. Greenwell creates this very intellectual and analytical character, and what Greenwell does early on that really helped me trust his writing and make me feel very safe that this was going to be a quality novel was make him stupid and not interested in understanding his illness due to the pain and the fatigue of being hospitalized. And then as the novel progresses and our narrator is able to understand more and comes to terms with the seriousness of his condition, he seeks out more information. He explains more. He gets the doctors talking more. Not only is this lovely yet simple character growth, but it allows us to know the state of our narrator, how well he is, how much pain he is in. We are still dripped pieces of information about his illness that helps infer the health of our protagonist, even when he's too distressed to think. For example, the narrator may not understand while several doctors are observing his treatment, but you know that means it's either very serious or very rare. Going on in the background of this novel is COVID, and this means that only one visitor is allowed in, of which Al, our protagonist's husband, is picked. There is conversations with his mother and sister who both want to come and visit but are unaware of the restriction and understand why he has picked his spouse. But this really does conjure up that marriage equality debate when gay spouses couldn't see their life partner because they weren't legitimate families. It's almost a little bit nice that it's paid reference to a dark time, and it's like, look at the positive change in the world, because yeah, it still sucks to be gay in this world, but hey, there's something nice that's happened too. We are actually moving forward, although some people might have us move backwards. As the novel progresses, it becomes more about a portrait of a character and his relationship with his husband, who is also a poet. Stories of how they met and fell in love. It gives this novel an almost weird contradiction to a man who is fighting for his life in hospital, but it allows us to emotionally connect with their relationship. And it provides our protagonist with an opportunity to reflect upon his life and what matters most to him. And that turns this novel into half medical drama, half love story. One of my criticisms of this book, however, was that it was critical of the US healthcare system, but it felt very kind in its critiques, leaving out or under discussing a lot of them. The dysfunctionality of hospitals seems to be the focus of the critique, and maybe my point of view is very skewed by being an Australian and all, but all hospitals are a little bit dysfunctional. It's a problem with large organisations. It's not the area I would be focused on if I was a US resident critiquing their healthcare system. If there is just one area of this novel to praise, it has to be Greenwell's beautiful prose. There are similarities in this novel to the Bosnian Finnish author Patjem Stanovic, but Greenwell, at least in small way, has depicted a much healthier relationship than Stanovic usually draws. This is another 4-star read for me. Given different judges, could this have made the Booker Prize longlist? Yes, it wouldn't surprise me if this novel narrowly missed out on being longlisted this year. It is not just a very Booker Prize book, it's a very this year's Booker Prize book, but done a lot better than some of the other novels on this year's long list. How I Won a Nobel Prize by Julius Taranto. This is another dark comedy. This time it's about academia, Me Too, and cancel culture. Helen, a young Asian physics grad student, is working on high-temperature superconductivity, HTSC, when her mentor Percy is accused of inappropriate sexual advances on a young man who is also a graduate student. There is a new university in the country that is offering a safe place to work for disgraced academics, and Percy asks Helen to move with him to this new university. Helen needs Percy to continue work on HTSC. He is an undisputedly brilliant man, a once-in-a-generation talent. HTSC is a real-life physics problem that, if you solve, you would certainly win the Nobel Prize for, as well as being gifted all sorts of opportunities, both financial and scientific. Taranto, through Helen, claims it would solve global warming in this novel, overstating the impact it would have. Scientists who overstate the importance of their work. What's next? Politicians who are also narcissists? But we can see the tentacles of seduction for this anti-cancel culture university. Helen, you could save the world. You just need to be a little bit Machiavellian. Taranto doesn't get too bogged down with explaining the science of high-temperature superconductors. For large parts of his story, it could be substituted with quantum computing or discovering dark matter or anything else in science he wanted. Later in the novel, Taranto does demonstrate he understands what he's talking about, and it is just about the only good physics explanation I have ever read in fiction. HTSC is one of those things that could be solved at any moment, or we could go another 100 years without any advancement in that field at all. Taranto has picked the most likely breakthrough in physics, and one that has some very nice knock-ons. It is not a random choice. Helen's husband is completely anti this rogue university, protesting it, and this causes no end of fights between them. It's not like the pressure to work at this university and conform to its value doesn't have a counterpoint in this novel. Ultimately, though, this novel is about Me Too, cancel culture, wokeism, and the movement against these things, being a conservative. Taranto really does understand all sides of this argument, and I love that while he presents the argument from all sides, he's not presenting an answer to anything. He's just asking a question. He's making you think about the problem and the argument. He's placing characters in situations and exploring their points of view, their different experiences and different realities. He's also been satirical, because while this might be a bit of a clickbaity topic that everyone has an opinion on these days, how to win a Nobel Prize is a lot of things, but first and foremost, I think it's a comedy. Should brilliant people be held to the same level of accountability as the rest of us? It should not be lost on us that people are not being cancelled in this novel for saying something shocking or needing more education. They are, for the most part, being cancelled for rape or using their position of power to obtain sex through non-violent coercion, which, if you're not aware, is also rape. Is the rape of one student worth the discovery of HTSC? This really is the trolley problem. Do you divert a train that is on course to kill 5 people and instead just kill 1? Or do you do nothing and let the 5 people die? If you allow a professor to rape 1 student for their discovery, where does it stop? Could they rape 10 or 1,000? Is HTSC worth the same as, say, a brilliant author or a brilliant piano player? Is there an equation for when the good produced by an academic's discovery is eaten up by the amount of people they have raped? When is the academic out of credit? You're out of rape credit, John. Get back to work and discover something before you can do it again. But this is pretty first layer stuff. There is a deeper discussion here too. The university in question is owned by a super rich billionaire. Research away, but you don't own your work. Taranto is delving into one of the big ethical issues of science and academia. Should information be freely available and published, as it is during the peer review process? Or should it be trademarked, copyright, and kept secret for profit? Should a scientist be able to profit off their work? I'm sure most of you watching this are pro the freedom of information, but let's just take this to the extreme. The nuclear bomb is a scientific breakthrough. Try finding a scientific paper for it. Transparency and freedom of information is important for science, but it's not the only thing that we should be considering here. Going back to cancel culture. Why is it called cancel culture when it is just boycotting? Nestle have killed babies. This is an oversimplification, but it really happened and it is easy to research. You can Google it. Stop buying Nestle. I just tried to cancel Nestle. I am serious. Stop buying Nestle. I would love everybody who watched this video to stop buying Nestle. Now, obviously, this play is not going to work. Nestle will not be cancelled. And it didn't work in 1977 when the boycott Nestle movement first brought the killing to babies to light. It was boycotting in 1977, but cancelling in 2024. And what is the difference? Well, boycotting is something that you can do. Cancelling is something that is done to you. And if that is an incidental changing of the narrative, I'll eat a Kit Kat. The change of language is not discussed in this book. I wanted to keep things a little bit fresh when you read it, but Taranto demonstrates the power structures at play, not just the seduction of money, but how it provides power, how it is self-serving, how money looks after money, and ultimately why money doesn't want money to be cancelled. On the opposite side of things, activists are portrayed as terrorists, and maybe you think that's unfair. I did, but it does ask a question. Does a just cause make it all right to kill? And how is that any different to a brilliant physicist who rapes people to discover high-temperature superconductivity? Is it just about different values? And if it is, who gets to decide which values are important? Let me ask you to consider a question. If you could press a button and nobody knew that you pressed the button, and instantly 1,000 people were raped, but climate change was solved, would you press the button? Or, let me ask another question. If we had an election on this topic and everybody had to either press the button or not, what would the majority vote for? And would that change your mind? The discussion this book brings up around ethics is brilliant. It's a wonderful novel for having your brain poked. Negative points? Okay, the plot's a little bit stupid. That is part of the charm and the humour of this. But it does read like the work of fiction, which sounds like a criticism I could level at almost any book. This is a bit take it or leave it. I don't think the fans of this novel are thinking about the plot, and I don't think that it is a particularly relevant critique. However, more concerningly, Helen is not a well-written character. While she never walked boobily down the stairs, Taranto can't capture that feeling of a young woman walking alone into a room full of rapists who are looking at her. I do appreciate it's kind of a representation of the gender divide in the physical sciences and the unwanted attention women can and frequently do receive. 1 in 4 women have experienced some form of sexual violence. Rape creates fear, and even if a woman has never been on the receiving end herself, she knows a woman who has. You don't need to be raped yourself to be scared of the prospect of it. And this is the very human aspect of this novel that is completely missing. Helen is trying to look attractive, but not too attractive. She's cold and calculating, and I think it's a sign of an author who just doesn't get the emotions at play. For an otherwise brilliant book not capturing the collective fear of rape, well, it's a massive hole. This is a novel where you're going to have to take the good with the bad. It is the kind of book I hate reading because the good bits are easily 5 stars and the poor bits are honestly terrible. And as a reading experience, you can focus on what you're getting out of it, but when you're trying to judge it for a prize, what can you do? The good and the bad bits of this book do not cancel each other out. They just sort of both independently exist. This is going to be a divisive novel, and it's going to have a big range of opinions on it. I'm going to give it 4 stars because it was very thought-provoking, but there is one really obvious and easy aspect to improve upon. Given different judges, could this make the Booker Prize longlist? 100%. This is such a love it or hate it book. Get the right judges and this wins. The Road from Belhaven by Margot Livesey. This is a historical fiction set at the end of the 19th century in Scotland with some very light fantasy elements in it. Lizzie gets visions of the future. She has no control of when she sees them. She just knows when she sees them they will come true. And this is used to give Lizzie insight into situations and push the plot forward. It's not really a central theme of the novel, and it's certainly not some big magical based thing. Rather, it's a coming-of-age novel about Lizzie, who thinks she will inherit her grandparents' farm, Belhaven, her grandparents who are raising her, until one day a long-lost sister returns. following Lizzie from child to mother, plotting her love life, the social pressures on her, her friendship with her sister, and the attitudes in Scotland at the time. It is quite a feminist novel, looking at the various roles young women have versus men, looking at how dating works, and the expectations society has on women and the opportunities available to them. This is a simple novel that really doesn't have enough meat on the bones. It's not the kind of novel you expect to see on a Booker Prize long list. It does have some literary elements to it, but it really is cozy commercial fiction. To be honest, while this novel is eligible for the Booker, and it's possible it was submitted, I think it's very unlikely that it was, and I think it's a little bit unfair to grade this as a Booker-style novel because that's not the intention of it. As Lizzie ages, there is a romantic subplot, and I thought that this was a good representation of the roles of women and the pressure they were under from different sides. The plotline where Lizzie has her future as a farmer taken away and has to find employment, debating between moving to Glasgow or Edinburgh or staying local and working on the farm that isn't hers. It's a nice representation of that coming of age and picking a career moment that so many students have to do at some point, I guess. But it's also a good representation of changing career and considering your future. It is a little bit of a slice of lifestyle novel, but I don't want you to think that there isn't any drama in the novel. Lizzie is often backed into a position where she can't keep everybody happy, and not to mention her visions are often of important events. Disasters where she doesn't know who is safe or who is in danger. Unfortunately, this is a very forgettable novel, and I can't point to any aspect of it and say the prose, plot, characters were lovely. But neither can I point to anything and say that it was particularly poor. It is unfortunately just a little bit bland, and I'm only going to give it 2 stars. The magical element of this novel doesn't really feel necessary. It is a device used by an author who can't generate the conflict in her characters to push the plot forward. Take Jane Eyre, water it down a lot, make Mr. Rochester more pleasant, and maybe not a complete selfish dickhead or something like that. Add a sprinkling of magic, transport it to Scotland. All that's really left is a nice piece of escapism. Women and Children First by Alina Grabowski. Set in a claustrophobic town somewhere in the northeastern USA, a teenage girl dies at a house party and the circumstances surrounding her death are unclear. Was it suicide, murder, a prank gone wrong, or just an accident? This is a book with so much unrealised potential. And it's not because the author doesn't see that potential. She is exploring gender roles, bullying, relationship dynamics, LGBT themes. This could have been a really powerful portrait of what it is like to be a young woman in this world. I really appreciate that we have the teenager's perspective and we also have a young teacher's perspective so we can compare the Me Too themes with the legitimate doubt because they're coming from an outsider's point of view, and the confusing lines between consent, coercion, situation and power really match that doubt, and you can see a variety of situations represented in just one. However, 10 points of view and switching between first and third person narratives is just too much. It is just not cohesive. This is an author who doesn't know how to edit her own brilliant ideas. It's hard. You need to be brutal. After she's come up with all of these characters and all of these cool points of view, what she needed to do is really focus in on 1 or 2 of them instead of trying to squeeze all these points of view into the novel and give them equal airtime. This book also reads like a collection of short stories, except that the stories don't seem to end, and what happens is you get the conclusion to that character's story later in another character's timeline, and sometimes this feels like a writing project, write one event from the point of view of 2 characters sort of thing. It's a novel that fails in its structure, but it sort of builds this dramatic thing. It makes you care about characters and then 50 to 100 pages later, in a throwaway line, you figure out what happened. It's not satisfying. It's a novel that fails in its structure, rendering what had the potential to be excellent as pretty poor. I do appreciate that Alina Grabowski is not playing it safe. She's taken big risks. So I could see this tickling a Booker Prize judge and landing on a long list. It is the sort of book that could be longlisted. It's really just let down by its quality and execution. 2 stars. Fast by the Horn by Moses Mackenzie. Mackenzie is the only author on this fake long list that I had previous experience with, and Olive Grove in End was absolutely amazing. Fast by the Horn is a 1980s Black Bristol Rastafarian retelling of the story of Abraham and Isaac, and I'm going to confess something here. I don't know my Bible well enough to appreciate this novel. I know the basic story of Abraham. I know, sacrificing his son and changing his mind and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of theological discussion in this book, and I just struggled to keep up with things. I missed things, and that stifled the character's development for me. It's something that is a bit of an unfair criticism of this novel, because if you know your Bible, you know which characters say things correctly or incorrectly, who's misinterpreting things to their own advantage, and so on and so forth. But really, I can only recommend this to somebody who is, pretty seriously religious, churchy type, or who is very well versed in the founding stories of the Abrahamic religions. It is written in a very thick Rasta accent. I found the accent really comfortable to read, and it really added to the settings. But I know some people will struggle with this, so if this is a book that is appealing to you, I do recommend you read a page or 2 before you purchase it. It's either easy to read or impossible, depending on where you fall on the line. Mackenzie is looking at quite a lot. Identity and race politics run through this book. Distrust between the police and the black community. The desire not to be English, because that is the nationality of the oppressors, leads the Rastafarians to talk about Ethiopia as the promised land. But as one character points out, if you go to Ethiopia, then what? You're not Ethiopian, you won't fit in there either. Which really gets to this identity issue. What does it mean to be both black and British? There is also a feminist theme here, which is kind of a reversal of the US feminist and civil rights movement, when a lot of black women left the feminist movement for the black movement due to their blackness not being recognised. In this story, there were a lot of women who left the Rasta movement due to the in-ground misogyny of it. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, but overall this just didn't work as a novel for me. I have to come back to the Bible stuff. It is used to develop characters, and normally if somebody says they're not smart enough to understand a book, I think you're just being too nice to say that a book was crap. But in this case, I'm not smart enough to understand, or at least well read enough to get this book. So I can only give it 2 stars, but other people may well love this one. And it certainly doesn't put me off Moses Mackenzie. I would definitely read his 3rd novel. Given different judges, could this make the book a long list? It is very niche. I don't remember a last time a long list contained a book written in such heavy dialect. This would need the ideal judges. It would be a surprise if it made it, not because it isn't brainy enough, but because it isn't the kind of book that often makes the long list. This is an example of the kind of book I feel that the Booker judges ignore. Anyone's Ghost by August Thompson. We know from the start that Jake dies. This novel is told in 3 parts, separated by 3 car crashes. We know Theron is with Jake for the first 2 crashes Jake has, but he is absent from the 3rd one, the fatal one. Theron is 15 and a stereotypical pot-smoking, medal-loving, school-hating kid. His dad forces Theron to get a job at a small local hardware store where he meets 17-year-old Jack, the store's manager. The two become friends pretty quickly, with Jake filling this kind of big brother role in the friendship. Theron quite clearly has a crush on Jake, but Jake has a girlfriend and seems quite oblivious to Theron's feelings. This is a very tender and emotional queer novel about male friendship, loneliness, depression, longing, coming of age, and the cavalier stupidity of youth, told with lyrical prose. As our two protagonists age during this novel, August Thompson is able to effortlessly build upon their teenage self to create completely different grown-up characters. Character growth is something Thompson is particularly good at, and this is so important to the reading experience of this novel, because the ending has been spoiled for us. Jake dies. We've had the entire book to feel sad, grieve, and get over it. I really enjoy the way Thompson has us questioning the sexuality of the two boys in his novel too. You have all this evidence there. It really should be very clear cut, but there is so much doubt. This must be what it's like for somebody who is trying to figure out their sexuality. As you're reading this, you likely have a lot of the same questions that our narrator Theron does about his sexuality. But we're still a little unsure about things. Later, Theron becomes a little bit more confident around his sexuality, knowing what he enjoys and how to please people. And I thought that this was an intelligent way of demonstrating that Theron knew who he was, equating sexuality with sexuality, gay, straight, bi with kink, frequency, and intimacy. The depression side of things, that discussion could have been a bit stronger. It definitely wasn't as good as the friendship, the growth, or the sexuality. So this book will lose a star for that. But overall, this is a very impressive debut novel. But I don't think a book like this would ever make the Booker Prize longlist. It's just not the style of novel that does. It's a little too simple on the themes. They were incredibly well explored, but if the Booker Prize is highbrow, this is a bit too middlebrow. Still, I think it's an excellent book. These letters end in tears by Mushid Teji Xavier. Christian Bessim falls for Muslim Fatima, watching her play football with the boys. A playful wink and an awkward interaction, and soon Fatima is calling Bessim her wife. This novel is set in Cameroon, where homophobia is not just rampant, but same-sex love illegal, and Fatima's brother doesn't approve of her relationship with Bessim. First, he punishes the two women with violence. Then he uses his influence to get the city's only gay bar raided by the police. Then finally, Fatima goes missing. Bessim ponders if Fatima has been thrown into prison, married off, banished, or even something worse. The majority of this novel is set 13 years after these events. We follow Bessim, who still dates women, although secretly, and she has never forgotten Fatima. Bessim uncovers new information about Fatima and starts to investigate. This is a big issue. Of course, it's a sapphic novel set in an unaccepting country, but we get to see secret practices of members of the LGBT community in Cameroon. We get to see the public face of people versus their private face. We get to see the incredible fear these people live in. When queer people are illegal, they can't very well report homophobia and violence towards the LGBT community to the police. There are examples in this book of people going on TV and saying that all LGBT people should be killed. This novel also looks at corruption in the Cameroon and how certain people can pull the strings behind the scene. These issues are all tackled wonderfully. You get a real sense of how powerless LGBT people actually are in Cameroon, especially once they become the object of persecution. The one issue underexplored in this book was Bessim being Christian while Fatima also being Muslim. Two religions that don't often get along. I was expecting this to be as central to the novel as the lesbian love story, and it's not that important to the plot. Overall though, this is the kind of book I love. It educates you about the lives of people who I've never really considered. I mean, how often do you specifically consider Cameroonian lesbians? It's a big emotions novel, and I mean, look at the title of this novel. They're seldom happy emotions, and this book satisfies. Was it perfect? No, but I felt so angry at the world Bessim lived in and so sad for her and how powerless she was. I felt her confusion at other characters' sexuality given how the regime in this country worked. This is a successful book and a great read. And books like this I don't really like being critical of, because overall it's wonderful. Yeah, it could have been better, but I really enjoyed my time with this novel. Why do I need to be mean to it? The prose was quite simple. Bessim and Fatima were wonderfully constructed, but the minor characters and, most importantly, Fatima's brother were a little bit lacking. The plot works, it sucks you in, it keeps you reading, but it doesn't dominate. I think that's perfect for literary fiction readers. And the setting was unbelievable. A really solid 4-star read. Would this book make the Booker long list given different judges? I can see little pieces of previous winners such as Shuggie Bain and The 7 Moons of Malia Meada in this novel. And while this book is completely different, this could definitely be a Booker novel. Although I would say that it is much more a Women's Prize novel than a Booker novel, but it is definitely in that overlap region between the two prizes. The Anthropologists. This is a relatively short observational novel where not too much really happens, but that is all about life. Just life. Life is the only thing that happens. Aisha and Manu have moved to a foreign city to start a new life. They can feel the absence of their old siblings. Nibblings are missed, grandparents are getting sick, and potentially won't be seen again. Parents are aging, life goes on. But they build a routine, a new life. They people watch as they eat out at Asia's new favourite cafe. This novel has absolutely lovely prose. I found reading it quite relaxing and a little cathartic, but not a lot happens. It is not an ambitious novel. You know when a really good author takes that time to set things up and it's kind of nice, but then you get this wonderful payoff. Well, this novel was kind of like that, but without the payoff. The themes were focused on a young couple entering adulthood, on belonging and starting anew, but nothing really made me think. It just didn't have a spark. I'm almost a little bit surprised this novel didn't make this year's long list. When you look at some of the books the judges went for, Orbital is especially similar to this novel. So it's definitely the kind of book that does get long listed, but honestly, this year's judges are probably the best judges that we've had for it. Maybe they just preferred Samantha Harvey's novel. Either way, I think if you enjoy atmospheric reads with lovely prose, such as Orbital, then you'll enjoy The Anthropologists. But if you found Orbital boring, then you'll probably find this book boring too. For me, this is a book that just didn't do enough. There was no tension, no exploration. The themes were just too simple. There was no plot and the characters were just averagely drawn. 2 stars for me, but this is definitely not my favourite style of book, and I can appreciate that the writing is lovely. This is a book that really does need to find the right reader for it. The Great Undoing by Charlene Alsop. Look at that cover. Look at how hideous that cover is. Can you even read the title of the novel on that cover? It's up there with Little Rot for the worst cover of the year. But this is a perfect example of that old cliche, because as bad as that cover is, this book is good. This book is a dystopian rewriting of Australia's colonial history. It is exploring truth, point of view, and identity, and how those things impact upon each other and our history, or the recording and retelling of our history. Set in the not too distant future, where surveillance is constant. There is a cyber attack on every satellite orbiting the world. Telephones are down. The internet is down. GPSs don't work, and hence flight doesn't work. If you were visiting the UK when you lived in Australia, there is no way of getting home. Scarlett is our protagonist, and on one side of her family is Holocaust survivors, the other Indigenous Australians. And I've never met an Indigenous Jew before. I've never heard of one before. It is such a unique point of view. Scarlett is a truth seeker, rewriting history to correct the lies, and as she examines the difference between Australia's recorded or accepted history and its actual history, she is also examining her family family's past. I don't think you could say that the genocide of the Indigenous Australian people and the genocide of the Jewish people during the Holocaust are the same. They are two unique events in our history, both horrible, but you can compare them. There are still similarities. There are lots of them. There are things that we can learn from them as well. Scarlett takes a Holocaust survivor to a tattoo parlor to get the number tattooed on her covered up. Only the woman in question refuses, not wanting this point in her history erased. Do the monsters get to have their crimes be made less visible? And we are pushed to ponder the great cover-up of the massacre of the Indigenous people in Australia. What an intelligent and well-argued point that is. That the Holocaust and World War II is such a great atrocity in our mind because the aggressors lost. And in acts of colonialism, the aggressors usually win. And so those crimes get erased. It's really intelligent. I've had my share of political arguments at dinner parties and social gathering. And when it turns to how Australia treats our Indigenous population, or discussions like if we should move the date of Australia Day away from Invasion Day, you inevitably have to prove that Indigenous people were mistreated or murdered by white settlers. And these are not people who consider themselves white supremacists. These are just normal Australians who are unfortunately ignorant, who maybe have listened to a little too much Alan Jones. Estimates of the Indigenous population pre-white settlement range from 300,000 to 3 million people. In 1928, the official census record of the population measured it at 78,430 people. Now that's a drop of between 74 and 97.4%. And yes, a lot of this is down to disease, but to put this in context, the Black Death, the most devastating illness we've ever seen, caused European populations to drop by approximately 40%. Or to put it differently, had a survival rate of 60%. When you compare that to a survival rate of between 26 and 2.6%, it's very clearly not just disease that killed the Indigenous Australians. Another thing that really comes up in this novel is, what even is race? Race is one of those things I think we struggle to define, but we all think we intuitively understand. And Alsop has a very cool way of demonstrating the difference between race and culture, and just how silly the idea of race is. But it is a spoiler. So to demonstrate her point, I'm going to show you two different people. Now pause this video and see if you can guess where they're from. One is Asian and one is European. Can you tell who's who? Genetically, you could look at the DNA of these people and tell that they were European and Asian. But in appearance, they do switch. If you look at the cover closely, while I still maintain that it is ugly, you'll notice it is a defaced cover of A Short History of Australia by Ernest Scott, an actual book that is often quoted in the novel, a book that begins by calling Australia empty pre-white settlement. Does the title, The Great Undoing, refer to the lack of technology now available in the world, or Scarlett's rewriting of Ernest Scott's very real history book? Did any of my Aussie viewers know that when Indigenous Australian men fought for our country during World War I and II, that they sometimes had trouble re-entering the country, and that some of them had to settle in South Africa? I certainly didn't, and I can't find evidence to corroborate this. But I can find evidence that this exact thing happened in 1902 at the end of the Boer War, when 4 Indigenous soldiers were told to find their own way home. The way history can be rewritten and retold is so central to this novel. Has Alsop heard an oral history that I simply cannot find in a Google search? As an Indigenous woman, she would have access to stories I know nothing about. Has she found the Boer War thing and decided to change it? Maybe to fit her novel, but also maybe to leave a delicious Easter egg for anybody who does the fact checking. Or did she just make something up and happen to land close to the truth? It is such a meta argument, and all of this comes back to the central themes of the novel. How is history told, and who owns it? Alsop does a TED talk on this topic, and it has the playful title, What a Bumhole in the Wall Taught Me About History. One of the things I adore about this novel that I haven't mentioned yet is the very personal story of Scarlett and how well balanced it is with the rest of this dystopian novel. It is a very rare thing to find a dystopian novel that can balance the copious amounts of world building needed with a personal story and explore big themes and build characters. But this is a very rare novel that not just manages to balance all this, but to blend speculative fiction with literary fiction and with history. This is also a book for book nerds. References are made to local Indigenous authors such as Tony Birch or Claire Coleman, and to international authors such as Octavia Butler and Ali Smith, weaving little bits of wisdom from the works of these authors into the novel, creating a reading list for fans and adding to the conversation. You don't need to have read these authors or all of their books. You're given enough information to follow the arguments and the thought. But I love the idea of a book about books that is essentially giving you a reading list to make this book even better. This recently won the Fiction Book of the Year at the Queensland Literary Awards, and I can really see why. A hand grenade of delicious thoughts went off in my head reading this novel. One of the most outstanding novels I have read this year. It is an easy 5-star read. Would this make the Booker Prize with different judges? Odds are that the reason this book didn't make the long list was that it was just not submitted. I've got to think that it's pretty obscure in the UK. I also note that as far as eligibility goes, that this book falls into a pretty grey area. If it were to overcome all that, well, it's still quite a speculative novel, and that's not a traditional Booker book. I don't think that means it would necessarily miss out if the judges like it, but a book like this rarely makes the long list, so it would be a bit of a eyebrow raiser. The Woman Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle. This is a third novel in the Paula Spencer series. Now, I haven't read books 1 or 2, and I don't think you need to. Paula Spencer was the victim of domestic violence, but her abuser is long since dead. Her daughter Nicola is now going through menopause. One day Nicola lands on Paula's doorstep. I've killed him. And she stays for months. Sure, lockdown is part of that reason, but there is so much to unpack in this mother-daughter relationship. Doyle writes such a complex, strained relationship with so much love, yet with hate, resentment, and anger as well. Oh my God, this is a man who can write, and this is a juicy novel. If you thought after my review of The Great Undoing that this fake Booker Prize had its fake winner all sewn up, then here is the competition. Paula is funny. Her mate Mary is even funnier, and together the two of them are an absolute cack. While this is a very serious novel dealing with the fallout and the intergenerational impacts of domestic violence upon the family, it is also a novel about women, and women who can often be silly, funny, and make each other laugh, and it's captured delightfully. Just to be clear, Doyle is not making jokes about the serious topic of domestic violence, but it's nice to have some humour between the discussions of such a big issue. I don't think that there is any area of this novel that was done poorly, but it really excels in its building of characters and their relationships. Through flashbacks, we see Nicola at various stages of her life, including her early teenage years. I really have to admire Doyle for his ability to turn a 50-year-old woman into a 13-year-old girl and have her be both recognisable as the same character and age-appropriate, recognisable as a 50-year-old or a 13-year-old. The complex and sometimes contradictory emotions Paula feels towards her now dead abusive husband are also very well done. It is easy to look at a violent relationship and see why somebody would leave, but it's harder to see why they would stay. Paula can miss specific things about her abuser without wishing he was still alive and living with her. Paula is currently in a long-term relationship with a gentleman, but they don't live together, leaving us readers to question, why is it? Is Paula protecting herself either physically or emotionally? Is this the kind of relationship Paula just might want in her life right now? Or is it just easier for her to get through life saying that she is in a relationship with somebody? Has Paula's previous relationship had a big impact upon her next? Or is it just who she is? And how do we even know who she is when the old relationship started almost 50 years ago? The plot is basically one big series of conversations between mother and daughter over the course of lockdown in Ireland, with memories, flashbacks, and the occasional flaunting of the rules. But we're not quite sure what Nicola has run from. What did she mean when she said, "I've killed him"? Did she actually kill somebody? If so, who and why? What you think is going to be a big conversation around domestic violence becomes so much more than that. For example, Doyle explores the objectification of women and girls and how it is normalized in our society, and how that leads to a safe breeding ground for predators who can often live unchallenged. The complexity of Doyle's mother-daughter relationship is only matched by the intricate details of his themes. But in looking at those relationships, if Doyle has done one thing better than anything else, it's to consider how the events of somebody's past will impact upon their future. I would love to know from any woman who has read this novel, is this an example of a man who can write women exceptionally? Because as a man reading this, I don't see how Doyle could have written Paula or Nicola any better. Even if I've missed things, I think that Doyle has captured the complexities and the subtleties of two characters exquisitely, and he made me laugh, he made me feel angry, he made me feel hopeless and very, very sad at various points. This is the second 5-star read of this experiment, and this is absolutely a Booker-worthy book from a previous winner of the Booker Prize. Before I compare this random selection with the Booker, there are a few things I want to acknowledge with this experiment. I started with a long list of books I made and then asked the AI to pick the list for me. There are almost certainly books on this long list that the judges wouldn't have read when they were selecting the long list. Nonetheless, I think 160-ish books, and we're selecting a dozen. That is quite a large sample size. But while 160 is a large sample size, one is not, and the results need to be judged through my bookish preferences. I've only selected 12 books and not 13. If you've seen my Booker long list video, you might know why that is, but essentially I'm comparing 12 books to 12 books. So how does this all compare to the Booker Prize? There are two books I think are exceptional on the Booker long list, and there are two exceptional reads here. But where it differs is the books just below the exceptions. There are so many good books in this random selection, just good reads with one or two things holding them back from being amazing, but books I got a lot out of reading in this random long list. From the actual long list, I can say, look, I enjoyed Creation Lake, but it is so very clearly my third favourite novel on that long list. Maybe on this random list there are a few forgettable novels. I enjoyed the escapism of The Road from Belhaven, for example, but ask me about it in 3 or 6 months' time and I won't be able to tell you much. There is nothing I hated in this random selection, while on the Booker Prize long list there were 3 of the worst books I've read this year. One of them even got shortlisted. When I was selecting the shortlist I wanted for the Booker Prize, it was really hard to find 6 books to fill it. For these 12 books, I'll probably select these as the 6 best books, but These Letters End in Tears is so unlucky not to make it. And it's the African author who is unlucky and misses out. It feels almost like a genuine book prize now. Overall, this is just a much better reading experience than the Booker long list, and I'm going to conclude that this year's Booker long list was legitimately poor, and that is likely due to the judges not having the best taste in literature. Before I reveal which one of these 12 books wins this fake prize, I would like to thank my wonderful Patreons for their support. If you would like to support this channel, please consider joining the excellent people named on the screen right now. Right, the winning book. Let's immediately cut this fake shortlist down to 2 novels. These 2 exceptional standout novels are almost the complete opposite. One written by a white man, although calling Irish people white, while correct regarding skin colour, does ignore the history of violence, poverty and colonialism in that country. The other author is an Indigenous woman. One is a traditionally brilliant novel. The other is so bold and so exciting. One is emotional with so much tender subtlety. The other one is an explosion of thoughts and ideas. Both books would be worthy winner, and while I was tempted to call it a tie and reference a previous year's Booker Prize, I ultimately did have a favourite. And when an author can do something new and do it exceptionally, well, it's very hard to ignore that book. So The Great Undoing by Charlene Alsop is the winner of this fake prize. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye bye.